All right, my friends, welcome into episode 185 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My guests on the show today are my good friends Charle Peck and Joshua Stamper. Now, you've probably been following Charle and Josh, I would imagine, at this point in time. Both have wonderful podcasts. Both have done wonderful books. They've both been on my podcast before. I will link both of their episodes down in the show notes so you can go and check them out. Charle and Josh and I have really built quite a relationship over the last few years. And so it was a lot of fun to just sit down with them and have a conversation here recently about a new project that they're working on. And they're going to talk about it here on this particular episode. They have a new book coming out that is titled The Language of Behavior. They have a new podcast also titled The Language of Behavior. And just listen in during this episode to how, especially Josh, how he talks about really leaning into behaviors that they were seeing when he was an administrator and how there's another way to go about doing the work. And that's really where the core of this language of behavior work comes from. This is such a great conversation. And again, two of my really good friends, two people that I think super highly of. I think they're two of the very best in the educator space. And this was a lot of fun having this conversation. I know you're going to love it. So let's get right to it with Charle Peck and Joshua Stamper. So I think one of the things I love most about what I get to do now are the people that I meet as a part of the process. I think a lot of people, when you jump into the work that I do or that both of my guests today on the podcast do, when people see that, they assume that you don't really have coworkers. They assume that you don't really build relationships like you would normally in an office. And as it turns out, my office, along with Josh Stamper and Charle Peck, happens to be this big virtual office that occasionally is small enough that we run into each other in person. But I'm super excited to have a conversation today with my good friends Charle Peck and Josh Stamper. Josh, Charle, thanks for joining me here on the podcast.
We're so glad to be here, aren't we, Josh?
Yeah, it's always good to see Darrin.
This is a lot of fun to have a chance to just sit down with the two of you, and obviously we're going to talk about the language of behavior, the book that you guys have coming up, the podcast that you have launched. But man, there's just so much, right? And you've both been on the podcast before, so there's not a huge need for, hey, here's who I am, but just give us like we're going from the first floor to second floor in the elevator, like that quick of the elevator version of who you are. Charle, I'll start with you.
Okay. All right, former teacher turned clinical therapist and trying to transform mental health and education. So there's a lot more to that, but all these great projects are kind of leaning towards that.
Awesome. All right, I'll go next. So yeah, I was art teacher to administrator to then transitioning over to the Teach Better team for about 5 years now. Now going on my own with Aspire to Lead. And yeah, just have the wonderful opportunity to work with Charle Peck on this brand new book. And we have a new podcast. So super excited to talk about those projects.
Yeah, definitely some exciting stuff that the two of you have going on. And, kind of like I said in the lead in there, we form these relationships through all kinds of different ways, right? And I tell people all the time that probably 95% of the people that are in the space that the three of us are in really are rooting for each other, are really like wanting to support each other, to lift each other up. They have this understanding that there's so much work out there to be done that we don't need to be like vicious competitors. Rather, we need to be the ones who help to push each other. And both of you certainly have done that for me. Josh, obviously, your support with helping me grow the podcast and just everything to do with that particular platform has just been amazing. And Charle, of course, you and I have been, part of the Teach Better MBA program for quite some time, which, I mean, we just continue to push each other on the business side, which has just been amazing. I know how I connected with each of you, but I'm curious about the connection for the two of you. And we'll talk later about why you decided to do a podcast and a book together. But talk maybe, and Josh, I'll have you go first on this one. Talk a little bit about the connection and how you two came together and ultimately decided to start doing some work together.
Yeah, so I think the entrepreneur group that you're talking about, Darrin, is really where I connected first with Charlie, with the Teach Better team. And then I asked her, I think, to be on my podcast, and then I was a guest on her podcast. And we just had a lot of things as far as our values and ideas were connected and shared. And I don't know, I had this idea about this book, The Language of Behavior. It was a long time ago, a blog post that connected with a lot of folks, and then it kind of turned into a presentation that I did at conferences and at school districts, and then wanted to build a book off of that. So I actually reached out to Jamie Costas through Connected Ed, and he loved the idea. I put out a couple chapters to him, and then he was like, you know what, this has a really heavy admin lens to it. Let's make it for all educators. So I came back and I sat on it, Darrin, for like a couple months. Literally, I was just like, I don't know if this is the right lens. Like, I feel like I need to have an additional voice in this. I don't know why, but Charlie popped in my head of someone that I had just connected with that, we had this synergy that was connected right away. And so I reached out to her and was like, hey, Charlie, this might sound crazy, but I had this idea. It's called The Language of Behavior. I've pitched it to Jimmy. I think you would be a perfect co-author for this book. So we met online and talked through it. And like right away, Charlie, I don't know, she must be crazy because she said yes, like immediately. And then we put some chapters together, sent it over to Jimmy. Jimmy absolutely loved the voice and the lens that Charlie had to the book. And literally we got like a contract the next day. So Charlie obviously brings a ton of value to the resource. And I'm just so proud and honored to have her as a co-author.
Oh, I mean, I feel the same way, Josh. It's so neat. You know what, when you come across people who it's easy with, like it's easy to do this stuff with, it is a huge commitment. Anyone who's written a book with somebody that they know, you have to get along, but you have to challenge each other, and you have to learn to just be like, listen, I trust you enough to tell you what I think, and also to receive like your opinion on what you think. And that's what I think works so well. So, I mean, it is so neat to come together with a project like this. The Language of Behavior, are you kidding me? Everybody needs to know about this. It's about tools and strategies to decode what's underlying the behavior. So I think it works so well to have Josh's amazing lens of not only just like an administrator, but as a human being, like great father, great husband, great friend, just such a neat guy. And I think together, that perspective is just so neat. So, yeah, it's exciting.
Well, I think I would agree with everything that both of you said there. I think that's really exciting. Certainly love to know that story about how, Josh, you're just like, hey, Charlie is the right person to connect with on this. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. So let's go into the actual language of behavior. And I mean, whether you want to talk about this from the perspective of here's kind of how we built the book, or maybe just let's start with just that phrase, right? The language of behavior. Right now, as we're sitting recording this heading into the holiday break, this will be released sometime after the holiday break. But let's be honest, school teachers, school administrators, school counselors, school social workers, on and on and on. Everyone, as they're listening to this, probably can think of 3 or 4 behaviors minimally that they're dealing with that certainly over time we've developed in education kind of this is how you manage behavior, right? And I teach an online classroom management course for Fort Hays State University as an example. And everybody comes into that course thinking classroom management is all about how you respond to certain behaviors. Obviously, that's not the direction I go with the course, and I'm certain that the direction you two are going with this project is not there either. Let's decode that a little bit. The language of behavior. Talk to me a little bit more about that and how that can maybe start to permeate the brains of our listeners. And Charlie, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, and I always go to Josh with this because I always say, Josh, this was your title. This is what he uses for all of his stuff. Yeah. Are you sure we should be calling our book this? Because I don't want to take it from you. And that is just the nice, kind-hearted guy he is. He's like, this is ours. This is ours. I love that title. loved it when I heard of it, because it's everything that I do is working with the underlying stuff going on. The behaviors are just the message. We all know this. But what I love is about the language is that we can learn to decode that. We can learn to interpret the language so that we can digest it. That's why teachers are struggling so much. They don't get that kind of training. I'm glad you're doing that, Darrin, because they're not getting that kind of training. So they're always like, what kind of tools and strategies can I use in my classroom to fix these kids or to respond because they're reactive right now, right? So what do I do to help those kids? And really, it always goes back to us. But we need to be better at kind of being the detective to kind of decode that and interpret what that message is telling us. That's the gist. Now, Josh is going to have a better lens, because I know that you do this work all the time, Josh, with leaders. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for those kind words, Charlie. The idea, Darrin, behind it was, this was during my administrative time. I was trying to change kind of the lens of how we responded to behavior, and also the proactive strategies that we could put in the classroom. Because you're right, like a lot of folks, when they go through the teacher program, they're not getting this information as far as like classroom management. Unfortunately, they get tossed into a classroom. They know how to create a lesson plan. They know how to provide instruction. They know how to give an assessment, and maybe they know how to kind of work through the data. But as far as the classroom management stuff, they typically default to what they experienced as a student. And as we know, that's a traditional approach and where we want to throw down the hammer. So for myself, when I became an administrator, I literally was given 3 things. It was detention, ISS, and OSS. And that was my tool belt. And every person expected me to bring the hammer every single time there was a student behavior. And what I found out was it wasn't working. I was breaking relationships with my students, and everybody, all stakeholders, were angry at me. And I was tired of this whole loop and system where I was really just throwing my hands up going, I just want to quit. Like, I don't feel like I'm being effective. I'm just literally supposed to be the sheriff bringing fear to everybody. And instead, like, the behaviors are only increasing, not decreasing. So that's really where the concept came from. I will say that the pinpoint area that was groundbreaking for me as a human being was when I became a foster parent, because I started getting some training and some ideas of like where the behavior was coming from. And, I started learning about the trauma and how it affects the body and how it affects the brain. And then they started using strategies that were far different than what I was using as administrator. And I started to make these connections going, well, why would I do this as a parent and I would do the opposite as an administrator? It doesn't make sense. It's the same problem. It's human beings, right? So how can we have some compassion, and how do we actually build relationships with these students and find the underlying issues that are going on in these lives so that we can build them up as human beings, right? To go through that hard adversity. And so that's really where the idea of the book came from. And so thankfully me and Charlie have really like poured our hearts and souls into this book as far as like giving practical tools and strategies to help any educator to not only decode, but then also do some proactive strategies in the classroom, build healthy relationships, finding the underlying issues that are going on. But then like on the opposite side of when they are making mistakes, because that will happen, as we all know, like how can we work through it where it's not just punishment, and really a fear-based model where we're actually going through and teaching the behaviors that we want and a way for them to restore what was broken.
Darrin, it's really important to know, too, that Josh, when he was a leader of that school, he did something completely innovative. So when I was actually reading through his part of the book, I was like, oh my gosh, we really have to get this part out. And they formed this group to try new strategies because they're like, listen, what we're doing is not working. Let's use this new process of trying new things and not doing this together, not doing this on my own. Let's do this together as a team. And that is what's really unique about this book is that lens that you bring in, Josh. I love that part of it myself. I can't wait to share it with others.
So I'm curious. Let's go a little bit further with that because as you're sharing, Josh, your story, you're taking me back to my first administrative role, system principal, high school discipline. It's cookie cutter discipline. It's I'm the hammer, you're the nail, and you're right. I had the exact same 3 tools in my tool belt that you had, and they didn't work. I mean, they just didn't, right? You guys have heard me tell the story, where my 2 roads, diverged from that exact type of experience. More and more and more schools are continuing, though, to struggle with that. And I think you're right. I mean, it's the same thing that happens in the classroom that we fall back to this is just how it was. It's the same thing as administrators, right? I mean, you go through your master's program, they don't teach you alternative ways to manage student behavior. They don't teach you, hey, let's think about what the root cause of the behavior is. Rather, it's punishment to gain compliance. And well, we know that doesn't work. How then, let's talk maybe about the formation of that team, Josh. How do you gain that that not critical mass, but at least that beginning, that momentum of a group of people who collectively say, "Oh, damn, enough is enough. Let's do something different." Talk about how that came about.
Yeah, so I was frustrated. I shared my frustration with my admin team, and I said, look, I can show you all the data, and I did. I had it, where it showed that we had every month more and more and more infractions and more discipline, and our ISS room was completely full. We had fights every other day on our campus. We had drugs, we had you name it going on. And so with that, I said, we can continue on this trajectory, and I can just continue to do the expectations of detentions, ISS, OSS, and at that time we also did Saturday school. And I said, I can continue to those practices, and we can continue.
Yeah, we had that one too.
Yeah,
that was another great tool, right?
The great tool. I love those Saturday mornings. That was awesome. So my point was like, hey, can I just have permission to try something different? And at that point, they kind of threw their hands up and they said, sure. So what I did was I was like, I need to find my disciples. I need to find like-minded folks that are willing to do something new, something, try anything to see if we could go a different direction. And so what I created was I called it the Relationship Action Team. Unfortunately, the acronym is RATS, and we were called the RATS team. I don't love that, but that's what it turned into. So what I did was I was just going through, I found a counselor, I found some teachers, all that were kind of just in the same boat, right? We were all frustrated with what we were doing before, and we wanted to learn. I came in and I said, look, I don't have all the answers. I'm learning with you. I'm not like leading this group. What we're doing is we're bringing new ideas to the table. And so what we did as a collective group was we said, okay, there's some norms that we need to establish. So one was when you get in the door, you need to be open-minded, right? We all have our own ideas, our own values, our own biases that we're going to bring to the table. We need to leave that at the doorstep, and we need to be open-minded. It may sound crazy. Some might be a strategy that's being used in California, and it's working for them. Let's just learn about it. And then the second piece is once we learn about it, we need to implement it in the classroom. And we need to make sure that we understand that this may work or it may fail, but we're at least trying it. And then the third thing is if it works, then we need to share it with our peers. We need to make sure that we're communicating to other people to say, I tried this, it worked, I think it might work for you too, right? And then the last piece that kind of goes with that third is that we need to invite other people into the group, right? So, hey, I'm learning a bunch of new things, it's awesome, would you like to come and join in the group, especially if they're using the strategy that you communicated with them. And what we did, Darrin, was we started with like 7 people at the beginning of the school year. This was like mid-year. This isn't even a full year of the RATS group, the Relationship Action Team. By the end of the school year, I had half the staff that was on the Relationship Action Team. So then this next year, it was easy to say, hey, this is something that is building momentum and is just going to be a campus expectation moving forward, is this whole idea of changing the way that we do things in the classroom. And it was easy to make that shift over as far as a campus initiative because it was a grassroots thing. It wasn't me from the top saying, hey, as a campus, this is what we're going to do from day one. Darrin, as you know, as a leader, that would be like a compliance-based thing. They'd be like, fine, and they would begrudgingly. And so maybe the top 10% that, would take it on and do it a wonderful job. And then the rest of them would just be kind of on the fence like, why are we doing this? Is this going to last for a long time? And then, you got others that would push back on it and never do it from day one. So with this kind of flipping it and doing a grassroots movement, I already had momentum built. So when it was the second year to say, hey, this is what we're doing as campus, I really didn't get anyone to say like, no, I don't want to do this. It was kind of, they already knew it was occurring in the classroom. They already heard about the Relationship Action Team. They also heard that it was working in the classroom and some of the strategies that were already being implemented. So that's the Relationship Action Team, and that's kind of how we started to implement that on the campus level.
So I have 2 thoughts on that, and then I want to come to Charlie for a question. first and foremost, it absolutely is essential. And if you're not picking up on from what Josh just said, you've got to build that team around you. If it comes from you at the top and only you, and you say this is what we're going to do, I mean, we've all been through that whole thing, right? The second thing, and let's not lose sight of the fact that Josh ended up with a ship full of rats. I think that's a rather interesting piece. Charlie, I'm curious. So, I mean, obviously, the proof is there. You know, Josh led that work, but from the therapist side, let's talk about the science behind this. Let's talk about like that deep in the core of the brain why the language of behavior is so important.
Yes, because we have to realize that the brain is scanning the environment for negativity. It's looking all the time for, okay, what is that's going to get me? What's going to harm me? And so we all come in with these different perceptions, and oftentimes we're just dead wrong. And so when as a therapist, I'm working on this thing called this story spirals. Well, what are you telling yourself? What is it that you're telling yourself that's based on total lies, but carrying throughout your day? So what the team approach does, what I love about this, is we get to challenge each other in a really safe, secure space, but also we're pulling in people's lenses and saying, listen, what you need to do is create this environment for kids that we're all going to be around. We're all going to wrap our arms around these kids and help them. That is the science behind it, the community, the connection. That is what's going to drive the change. That's what our kids need. Everything else that we are doing is isolating them, or isolating them from their peers, isolating them from us. It sends the message to them, I don't want you in here. You're not worth being in here, or I can't handle you, or I am annoyed by you. I can't stand to be in your presence. We are taking the complete opposite approach to that. And that is what is going to drive these kids back. That language, that underlying language is, I'm isolated, I'm alone, I feel rejected, I feel like I don't know who I am, I don't feel like I belong. This brings them right back there. That's why they want to keep coming back to that teacher's classroom who's going to welcome them in, or the building. And there's more to it.
I love
I'll
that.
stop there. I could go on for, a few
Oh
hours.
no, that's all good. I mean, you take as much time as you want. I am totally okay with that. I'm curious.
So
So
a lot in there because there's so much to say. There really is. We actually
Yeah.
had to take so much out about some of the science. Jimmy was like, you know what? People don't need to hear all of that. So, but yeah,
right,
it's a big
yeah,
deal.
you got to certainly find that balance there. So let's throw a little bit more value here to our listeners. So I mean, I'm sold. I'm convinced. But now, give me a strategy. You know, if the two of you showed up on my campus, and you're going to work with my leadership team, you're going to work with my staff, you're going to work, with whatever, right? Let's talk strategies. Give us a strategy that we can go and implement in our classrooms and say, hey, let's give this one a shot.
Josh needs to tell you about the push-in model. I tell it to everybody now. I love it. It is something that we can absolutely do. It pulls in the team approach, but also gives that time and space for the teacher to reconnect with the kid, which is essential. Go ahead, Josh.
Let's go.
This was discovered in that relationship action team. Someone had found this, I think in like St. Louis of all places. Like they heard about it, they brought it to the table. We're like, let's try it at least, right? So what the push-in model was that we started to look at the data and we started to see that the low-level infractions were a really high amount of things. So that's like essentially disrespect or trying to be a class clown or whatnot, right? A disruption in the classroom. And we were finding that thousands of minutes were being lost just because of these low-level infractions. So we're like, well, what can we do to keep the student in the classroom, but still allow the teacher to have an opportunity to speak with them to kind of get them, back on the right page. So the push-in model is that the teacher, when they, have a low-level infraction and they want to speak to the kid, they call the front office and they ask for a push-in. Push-in can be any staff member, right? It could be a coach, it could be another teacher, it could be an administrator, counselor, whoever goes into the classroom and leaves the teacher, so the teacher is able to get like 3 to 5 minutes with the child outside the classroom, away from their peers, right? Because we're not trying to call them out, where they can ask a couple clarifying questions of really kind of getting an idea of what's going on in their world to figure out, 1, do you need resources? Then 2, get them on the same page as far as the expectations, and then having a verbal agreement of getting them back in the classroom to kind of reset them, right? So they take the student for a walk, maybe get a drink of water, take them somewhere else, right? and get kind of an understanding of what's going on. Because especially in middle school, Darrin, you know this, the kid could have, a confrontation with their girlfriend or their boyfriend in the hallway, and then it kind of derails everything inside of them, so they're not really there to learn, and then you can start seeing these disruptive behaviors, or maybe it's not compliance or putting their head down or whatnot, right? So this gives an opportunity for the teacher, because this was the biggest thing, is like, I don't have time and space to work with the kid. I want that opportunity, but I just don't have that when I have 30 other kids in the classroom. Well, the push-in allows that teacher or administrator to go in the classroom, relieve them for a very short period of time, so that the kids can continue to work as far as a class, but then it gives the teacher the opportunity to really get to know the kid a little bit more, to show them, I care about you, I want you in this space, right? Instead of just kicking them out, which Charlie's already talked about what that looks like and how it feels to that kid. It really just gives that one-on-one time with the teacher and the student to get to the bottom of things, to get a better understanding. And then again, like I said, have those expectations reviewed and agreed upon to get them back into the educational space with the content expert.
Super powerful stuff right there. I love that so much. How did you make sure, like what was the strategy for when they call for a push? Like, I mean, we have somebody on standby, it's just whoever's available? I mean, you had to build a system around that.
Oh, for sure. So then we were looking at the master schedule, and we literally had a push-in team, and then everyone that was on that push-in team had a radio with them on hand. So like our coach, we had one coach that was a part of that push-in team, that we knew he was kind of an extra body that could easily leave the gym to be able to go to a classroom. So it was kind of more on proximity and availability, but we did have a team, so when the front office called for a push-in, then whoever was the closest and available would then just get on the radio and say, hey, I'm there, I'm going to push in. So everybody else on that team, that push-in team, knew that it was being covered. So we had, 7, 8 adults that were able to go in. We also did a training. We also met regularly to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as the system and the process, and then also to get some feedback of, do we need to make some changes moving forward?
And let me just say this, as a teacher, I would counselor, I've got a lot of stuff to do. But if you think about it like this is what people have to understand, is it's very reciprocal. Like, they'll do it for you, you do that for me. And ultimately the goal is to keep the kid in the classroom. They're not losing that instruction time. So you actually have time later, because you're not off track, especially dealing with that kid later and creating more work. You also reduce the behaviors over time. What Josh and I aren't really saying enough here is this is preventative. These are strategies and tools that are preventative. Over time, if you spent more time with Josh, he'd tell you about all of the things that happened as a positive result that reduce those behaviors. And it brings the staff back together too. A lot of staff are working in this disjointed system, and they're so feeling chaotic, they're feeling overwhelmed, burned out. A lot of people are stepping out. These are strategies, especially this one, I loved it, because it's a strategy that's going to pull us back together as a staff. It's going to create that positive climate that we need, and it gives solutions to those problems that we don't know what to do on our own. See, that's the problem, is we can't do these things on our own. We have to have the team around us. And that's why when Josh said he selected people, or people stood up first to do this and then others followed, that's how we're going to create that change. We've got to stick with the people who want to spark this change, who will demonstrate to the other people who are kind of like, I don't know about this. They're gonna demonstrate it and then cheerlead it on, because they're gonna see the effects of it. That's what's awesome about this kind of thing, and that's just one of many. I mean, there's the strategies I'm thinking in my head, because we're just wrapping up the book now, and all these things are coming back. There's so many strategies that are practical. Like, they are going to infuse into your everyday practice. Some you have to plan for them. That's just part of it. But some just infuse into your everyday practice. And even if you've heard them before, like one of our tenets, we call them the 3 tenets. It's the framework that we use to actually teach it and train it. The first one is about the environment, but we offer some new things, and we offer you to just challenge your prior thinking. Maybe it wasn't working. Maybe this is a new approach. Maybe you need to try this new thing. So that's where we're coming to you with. I mean, it's really exciting. It's got to be practical, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm sure there's just so much information that you guys can continue to share, so much so that you decided to launch a podcast titled The Language of Behavior, which just makes perfect sense. So talk just a little bit about what's happening on the podcast, kind of how you guys have structured that, and obviously where people can find it.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh. You know where all that stuff is.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, you could find it on any podcast platform. But the language of behavior. The reason we did the podcast, as we've kind of mentioned, Charlie, especially like, there's so much information, right? And as far as the book goes, obviously we poured a ton into that resource, but at the same point, we also had to cut a ton out of the book, and so we wanted to make sure that we had a space for people to be able to kind of get a weekly injection of information about the science, about the background, but then also strategies that they can implement right away, where they don't have to wait for the book to come out. Obviously, it's coming out soon, but also some continued conversation. And what we've also tried to do, Darrin, is we've tried to get people's questions, right? So whatever's happening in the world right now, they're sending questions to us, and then we're trying to take those questions and answer them on the podcast to make sure that it's relevant and it's timely within the episode. And then we're also monthly bringing in guests to come in and to speak knowledge and wisdom into the topic of student behavior. So we just had Todd Neslony on. He did a brilliant job. So, for folks that know about him, the co-author of Kids Deserve It, definitely check that out. He was amazing, as always. So we're going to continue to have that model where Charlie and I, for the most part, are speaking on the podcast monthly, but then we occasionally will have guests come in and also share their perspective.
Yeah, and what's really good about it, Darrin, is that your listeners can get like pieces of information that we're seeing in schools today. I'm a school-based therapist too. I do that with the minimal time I have. I wish I could do it more to work with those kids more. But I get to see it on the inside. And so a lot of problems are happening about the communication. So one of the things that Josh and I did is we did 2 or 3 episodes about how do we actually improve that communication system with an outside therapist coming into your school. Like, how do you even do that? And by the way, how can teachers be better informants? How can they be because they're a critical part of this mental health.
I'm still recording.
Okay, we forget about that. Yeah, and so we forget about that. So anyway, it's a big problem that we're having, that disconnect, but this is a good way for Josh and I to solidify the system and give people step by step of what to do.
Outstanding stuff. I think it's definitely something that is needed. It's definitely a resource that a lot of people are going to take advantage of, and definitely I will be shouting it at the top of the mountains to the mountains here in Nebraska, shouting it from the top of the mountain that definitely everybody needs to be checking out the work that Josh and Charlie are doing. Josh, I'll go to you first on this final piece. It's the Leaning into Leadership podcast. I ask everybody who comes on the show how they're leaning into leadership. You've shared so much, but maybe just one more thing that you're doing to lean into leadership right now.
I think that just be confident in going against the grain as a leader. I know for me, especially starting this work, I kind of wanted to live up to the expectations of others, and I wanted to lean into some things that I didn't agree with or have value in. Like, I just felt like I needed to, and Darrin, me and you have talked about this on a shared episode before, of like being Superman, right? I wanted to take care of all the problems, and I wanted to do what people expected of me or viewed me as an administrator. And what I found was it really was just killing me inside, because I felt like I was not being true to myself and my belief system. And once I started to go against the grain on that and say, screw it, I'm just going to be who I am as a leader and take it or leave it. This is who I'm going to be. That's when I started to find my joy and my passion, things that I lost as an administrator. And if you want to be the best version of yourself, you do need to lean into the things that you truly, to your core, have beliefs in. And once you start to fall in line with that, I think that's when you are more powerful on the campus and are a better leader. So I know for this work specifically, I just did a 180, and because of it, as a human being, I was better. I know for my students, I was better. For my staff, for my family at home, I was just like a whole new person, renewed. And it was because I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't.
All right,
Yeah,
Charlie.
it's a great question, Darrin. It's about understanding who you have around you already that are willing and able to make the changes that you would like to be a part of, that your vision includes them. And right now that's teachers. Right now our teachers are asking to be equipped. They want those practical tools and strategies. Many of them, they might have one foot out the door because they're not being heard and they're not getting those. But you have the power to pull them along and say, I've got something for you. Let's do this together. And so those practical strategies will go a long way. They want to feel energized again, and this is how we'll do it. But I really believe that we need to reinvest in our teachers.
There we go. Outstanding stuff, my friends. So good to have an opportunity to spend some time with you and to talk about the language of behavior. So, Charlie, Josh, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning into Leadership.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Darrin.
Well, as I said, folks, that was just a fantastic conversation. And again, I appreciate Charlie and Josh so much coming and joining me here on the show. Be looking for their book coming out fairly soon. I know they'll have announcements about it. And definitely go and check out their new podcast. Certainly a lot of fun, the work that they are doing. And now it's time for a pep talk. So as we kick off 2025, the pep talk that I want to share with you today really connects to the work that you are doing between now and the end of your school year. I had a fantastic conversation with a fairly new building level administrator earlier this week. And as she and I were talking, she told me that she felt like she knew everything that needed to be done. She felt like she was comfortable with delegating to the other members of her team. She just felt like she wasn't exactly sure, how do I get from where I am now to what my grand vision is for the school? Her vision had something 5 years down the road. Here's where I think the school can be. And it's fantastic. And I love that she's thinking that way. But here's where sometimes we as school leaders kind of fall off the path a little bit. We see that big picture. We see that goal of where we want to go, but then we don't backwards map it. So my pep talk today for you here in January 2025 is very similar to what I shared with that administrator the other day. Identify where you want to be at the end of May, the end of June, whenever your school year ends. What do you see as realistic? What do you see as the thing that can happen between now and then? Whether that's guaranteed, I will see this in every single classroom, or it's something to do with performance, percentages or scores, or maybe it's something related to behavior, whatever it is. Identify what that is. Just focus on now until when we put the plane on the ground in May or June, and then start to backwards map that thing, right? I want you to really think about, what do I have to do? What intentional steps must I take and must my team take in order for us to be where I want us to be when we close the school down for the summer? Backwards map it, build that plan, and then simply go work the plan. Make sure you stay focused on that plan. If you need a planning tool to help you, I will hyperlink in the show notes the free Principals weekly planner tool that I have available to you through the Principal Academy. I'll put that in the show notes. Just go grab that thing. It is designed to help you do exactly this. Figure out your plan and go work your plan. That's what 2025 is all about. Okay? Make a plan, work the plan. That's what I got for you this week, folks. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Get out there. Have a road to awesome day.